The child no one claimed, 1871, Blackwood County, Massachusetts. No one could agree on the day she arrived. Some said it was early spring, when the ground was still hard and gray. Others insisted it was late winter because the river hadn't thawed yet. But every record agreed on one thing: she arrived alone. No parents, no belongings, no explanation. She was found sitting on the steps of the Blackwood County almshouse just before dawn, hands folded neatly in her lap, back perfectly straight, eyes open but unfocused, as if she had been waiting. The night watchman would later testify that she didn't react when he spoke, didn't cry, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He said the only reason he knew she was alive was because the frost hadn't settled on her skin. They estimated her age at 9 years old, but she never confirmed it, because from the moment she entered the building, she never spoke a single word. The almshouse was not a place for children. It was where the poor, the sick, the unwanted were stored until they either recovered or disappeared quietly enough that no one asked questions. Children usually cried there. This one didn't. They gave her a name because paperwork demanded one: Eliza Ward, a name pulled from a ledger of abandoned surnames already used twice before. No birth record was ever found. During her first week, nothing happened, which in retrospect is what made everything else so difficult to explain. She ate when instructed, slept when placed in a bed, stared at nothing for hours, but never resisted, never smiled, never asked to leave. The matron wrote, "Child exhibits no defiance, no curiosity, no fear." Doctors would later argue this was trauma. At the time, they called it compliance. By the second week, the staff began noticing something small, then another, then something they would later wish they had written down more clearly. The night watchman complained of headaches. A nurse fainted in the east wing. The cook burned herself badly, claiming she felt dizzy. Nothing serious, nothing provable, just discomfort, and always somehow near the child. They moved her room. The discomfort followed. By the end of the first month, 3 staff members had resigned, 2 citing illness, 1 without explanation. Eliza remained, silent, watching. The first death occurred on a Tuesday. The matron collapsed while walking Eliza to the examination room. Witnesses said she clutched her chest, then her throat, then fell. She was dead before the doctor arrived. Heart failure, they ruled. Common, unremarkable, except for one detail. The matron had been in perfect health that morning, and Eliza had been holding her hand. They separated the child after that, not out of fear, out of protocol. Observation only. No physical contact, but the pattern didn't stop. It only grew quieter. By the end of the year, 9 people connected to Eliza Ward were dead, none of them violent, none suspicious, all explainable, all dismissed. And so, officially, there was no pattern at all. What no one documented was the fact that Eliza had begun to smile, only once, only briefly, and only when no one was watching. Part 2, Patterns Without Names. By the winter of 1872, Blackwood County Almshouse had stopped discussing Eliza Ward openly. Not because the incidents had ended, but because speaking her name had begun to feel inappropriate, unlucky. Staff whispered instead. They said the girl, or the silent one, or sometimes nothing at all, just a glance down the corridor toward the room where she slept. Eliza's room had no decorations, no toys, no books, not because they were forbidden, but because she never touched them. A wooden doll was placed on her bed once. It remained in the exact same position for 3 days until it was removed. Dust untouched, no fingerprints, no signs of interest. Dr. Harold Finch was the first to insist on documentation, a man of science, a man who believed patterns were only invisible until measured. He began keeping a private ledger, not official, not submitted, just notes, dates, names, proximity, and always whether Eliza Ward had been present. Entry, February 3rd, 1872. Nurse Abigail Morse reported dizziness after escorting the child. Symptoms ceased after separation. Entry, February 11th. Groundskeeper Thomas Bell collapsed near west stairwell. Child present earlier that morning. Entry, March 2nd. Kitchen assistant ill. Vomiting. Claims child watching caused distress. No medical basis. At first, Finch tried to disprove himself. He intentionally excluded incidents, searched for coincidence, looked for alternate explanations. Poor sanitation, cold weather, overwork, but the ledger kept filling, and the margins began to feel too small. Eliza herself remained unchanged. She aged visibly, but subtly. Her hair grew longer, her limbs thinner, her eyes deeper. But her behavior never evolved. No tantrums, no regression, no attachment. Children, Finch knew, always attached to something. She did not. The first formal evaluation occurred in April. 3 doctors, 2 nurses. One priest included not for theology, but because he had experience with orphans. Eliza sat on a wooden chair, hands folded, feet not touching the ground. They asked her questions: name, age, origin, silence. They introduced stimuli, bright objects, sudden noises, emotional prompts, nothing, until the priest spoke, not loudly, not sternly, just a question asked as if it were ordinary. "Do you know why you're here, child?" Eliza tilted her head, just slightly. The room froze. She looked directly at him, and for the first time in recorded observation, she nodded. The priest later admitted his hands were shaking. Because she hadn't nodded yes, she hadn't nodded no, she had nodded knowingly. That night the priest fell ill, violently. By morning he was dead. Cause listed, fever complicated by exhaustion. No autopsy requested. But Dr. Finch added a note in the margin. A single line. Child acknowledged awareness. Proximity followed by fatality. By summer, Finch stopped sharing his ledger. He had realized something worse than the pattern itself. No one wanted to know. The board didn't ask questions. The county officials discouraged speculation. Funding depended on stability. Stability required normal explanations. And Eliza Ward was becoming expensive. They proposed relocation, not punishment, not exile, just movement to see if the pattern followed. She was transferred to St. Dymphna's Home for Wayward Children, a newer institution further south. Cleaner, better staffed, and crucially no shared personnel. Eliza was escorted by train, 2 attendants. Dr. Finch did not go. He said later that this decision haunted him because the attendants never arrived. The train reached St. Dymphna's on schedule, but Eliza was alone. The conductor claimed the attendants disembarked early. The attendants were never found. No witnesses, no tickets recovered. Eliza stepped onto the platform, calm as ever, waiting. Within 6 months, St. Dymphna's would close permanently. Part 3. The first institutional collapse. St. Dymphna's prided itself on modernity. Electric lighting in the main hall. Fresh water access. Individual beds. It was meant to be the future of care. Eliza Ward became its quietest resident. Staff described an atmosphere change within weeks, not events. Atmosphere. Rooms felt colder. Voices carried strangely. Sleep became difficult. Children reported dreams, not nightmares, but repetitions. The same hallway, the same door, the same girl standing still, watching. The first incident was small. A janitor slipped on dry ground and broke his neck. The second was a nurse who fainted near the dormitory. The third was a child who stopped eating entirely. Doctors blamed hysteria, contagion of suggestion, until the superintendent collapsed during evening inspection. Dead within minutes. Eliza was present. She always was. Records show 11 deaths in 8 months. No shared illness, no structural failures, no violence, and no mention officially of the child. Her name was excluded, not erased, just omitted. The closure report cited operational instability. Staff were reassigned, children transferred. Eliza Ward was moved again, this time quietly, no public notice, no accompanying paperwork, just a new room, a new building, and the same silence. Dr. Finch received the notice weeks later, one line, subject transferred, case closed. He closed his ledger that night, not because the case was over, but because he finally understood. This wasn't about solving anything. It was about containment. He would not reopen the ledger for 23 years. Part 4. When medicine runs out of names. By 1879, Eliza Ward was no longer considered a child. Not officially. No birthday had ever been recorded, so the institutions simply stopped counting. She was described instead as small, frail, developmentally arrested. Words that allowed her to remain where she was without explanation. She had been transferred again, this time to Ravenhurst Medical Annex, a hybrid facility that sat somewhere between hospital and asylum. It was where cases went when no one knew what category to place them in. Eliza fit perfectly. Ravenhurst specialized in classification. Everything had a label. Every behavior had a column. Every abnormality was supposed to resolve into a diagnosis. Eliza broke the system within 3 weeks. Week 1, doctors recorded normal vitals, heart steady, breathing shallow but consistent, no fever, no visible neurological impairment. She responded to pain, reacted to temperature, a body that behaved normally, a mind that refused to participate. Week 2, sleep patterns disrupted, but not insomnia. She slept deeply, too deeply. Nurses reported difficulty waking her. When she did wake, she sat upright immediately. No grogginess, no confusion, just alertness, as if she had never been asleep at all. Week 3, the deaths resumed, not suddenly, gradually. A nurse complained of chest tightness. A doctor collapsed during rounds. A patient in the adjacent ward stopped breathing in the night. No contact, no shared rooms, just proximity. The medical staff tried harder than the almshouse ever had. Blood tests, reflex examinations, chemical analysis of food and water, air quality checks. They even inspected the walls. Nothing. Dr. Elias Morton, younger than Finch, but equally meticulous, began noticing something the others missed. The timing. Symptoms worsened after prolonged observation. Not contact, not conversation, observation. He wrote, "Those who spend the most time studying the subject deteriorate fastest," which raised an uncomfortable question. What if the act of studying her was part of the mechanism? They altered protocol, shortened evaluations, rotated staff, limited exposure. Deaths slowed, but didn't stop. Then came the first psychological fracture. Nurse Lydia Harron, experienced, stable, respected, began reporting auditory disturbances. She said she heard nothing unusual, but that silence itself had become overwhelming. as if the absence of sound was pressing inward. She requested reassignment, was denied. 3 days later, she leapt from the second-floor stairwell, survived the fall, died 2 hours later from internal bleeding. Eliza was seated in the corridor outside the stairwell at the time. Not watching, just present, the phrase environmental influence began appearing in reports. Vague, flexible, non-committal, but something had shifted. The doctors were no longer trying to cure Eliza. They were trying to understand how far her influence extended. Dr. Morton attempted an experiment. Not approved, not documented. He arranged for Eliza to be moved to an isolated wing, empty rooms, minimal staff, then monitored outcomes in the rest of the building. For 8 days, nothing happened. No incidents, no complaints. The atmosphere lightened, sleep improved. Morton was convinced. On the 9th day, the power failed. A storm, routine. When the lights returned, Eliza was gone. Her door was still locked from the outside. The key was in Morton's pocket. They found her in the central observation room, sitting in a chair, facing the one-way glass. On the other side, Dr. Morton lay dead. Cause: cerebral hemorrhage. Time of death estimated within minutes of Eliza's arrival. That night, Ravenhurst's board convened in emergency session. For the first time, the phrase containment subject appeared in official minutes. Not patient, not resident, subject. They sealed her wing permanently, restricted access. 2 attendants only. No eye contact encouraged. No prolonged presence. No unnecessary observation. The goal was no longer knowledge. It was minimization of harm, and for a while it worked. Part 5, Locked Wings and Silent Corridors. The restricted wing of Ravenhurst was never meant to be occupied. It had been built as a contingency, a place to isolate infectious patients if the city was ever struck by plague. Thick walls, limited windows, air vents that could be sealed manually. It became Eliza Ward's final residence, at least within that institution. She was moved without ceremony. No announcement, no paperwork posted publicly, just a name added to a restricted ledger, and then removed. Only 2 attendants were assigned. They rotated weekly, never overlapping shifts, never speaking to each other about her. They were instructed to deliver food, remove waste, and leave. No conversation, no attempts at engagement. If Eliza spoke, which she never had, they were to report it immediately. She never did. The deaths slowed dramatically. Months passed without incident. The board relaxed. Some even began to believe they had overreacted, that the pattern had been coincidence after all. That fear had filled the gaps science couldn't. Then attendant Samuel Price failed to report for duty. He was found in his quarters, dead in bed. Cause: cardiac arrest. Age: 26, healthy, no prior conditions. Eliza had not been seen by him for over 12 hours. The second attendant, Clara Wynne, lasted 6 more weeks. She was meticulous, followed every rule, avoided looking directly at Eliza, but she began leaving notes. Small things, comments in the margins of logs. She's closer to the door than yesterday. I don't remember moving the chair. She's standing now. Cameras did not exist. There was no way to verify. The notes were dismissed as stress, until Clara was found seated outside Eliza's door. Alive, unresponsive, eyes open, breathing shallow. She never spoke again. Lived another 11 years in a state hospital. After that, Ravenhurst made its decision. Not written, not voted on, just understood. Eliza Ward could not remain, and she could not be released. They contacted the state, then the federal level. Letters were exchanged, language softened, responsibility diffused. Finally, an agreement was reached. Eliza would be transferred to a non-public federal research site. No name recorded, no location disclosed, no oversight committee assigned. Her final Ravenhurst record contained one sentence. No diagnosis, no summary, just a conclusion. Continued proximity presents unacceptable risk. The transfer occurred at night. Unmarked carriage, 3 escorts, none of whom would ever appear in records again. Eliza walked willingly. As always, silent, composed, almost relieved. Ravenhurst closed its restricted wing permanently. The corridor was sealed, walls bricked over, staff instructed not to discuss it. Over time, the wing became legend. Then rumor. Then nothing, and Eliza Ward became a file. Part 6, the report that was never published. The federal site did not have a name, not officially. In internal correspondence, it was referred to only by a number, Facility 12B, and even that designation shifted over time, as if permanence itself was being avoided. It existed in a place chosen specifically for its absence. No nearby towns, no rail stops, no reason to pass through, and no public records acknowledging it ever operated. Eliza Ward arrived at Facility 12B in the winter of 1881. By then, she appeared no older than she had a decade earlier, smaller than most adults, thinner, but unchanged in ways that unsettled even seasoned observers. Her hair had never been cut, her nails never grew long, her posture never slouched. Time, it seemed, treated her differently. Facility 12B was not a hospital, and it was not a prison. It was a research containment center, one created to handle anomalous human variables. That phrase appears once in a surviving memo, then never again. The staff were specialists, physicians, neurologists, psychologists, men who had published papers, who believed deeply in rationality. They were not told Eliza's full history, only fragments, enough to justify caution, not enough to inspire fear. The first months were quiet. Eliza was placed in a reinforced observation room, walls thick, glass layered, ventilation isolated, no shared air, no shared water, no shared physical space. She was the most contained human being in the country. And still the headaches began. Doctors reported pressure behind the eyes, difficulty concentrating, memory lapses. One researcher misplaced his own notes repeatedly, always after long observation sessions. Another complained that Eliza's reflection appeared closer than she was when seen through glass. These complaints were logged, then dismissed, then quietly stopped being logged at all. In response, the facility director authorized the comprehensive analysis, a full documentation effort. Every incident, every death, every transfer from Blackwood County onward. The goal was clarity, finality, closure. The report took nearly 2 years to compile. Dozens of contributors, hundreds of pages. It tracked patterns across institutions, correlated proximity with mortality, mapped exposure duration against symptom severity. The conclusions were cautious, measured, terrifying. The report did not claim Eliza Ward caused death. That would have been unacceptable. Instead, it stated, the subject appears to correlate with systemic biological destabilization in surrounding individuals, increasing the probability of fatal outcomes without direct causal mechanism. In simpler terms, where Eliza existed, order broke down. The final section addressed ethics, containment feasibility, long-term risk. It posed a question no one wanted to answer. Is permanent isolation sufficient if influence persists without contact? There was no recommendation, just silence. The report was never published, not classified, not rejected, simply intercepted, its copies recalled, its contributors reassigned, some promoted, some transferred. 2 resigned abruptly. 1 died within a year. Cause listed as natural. Only 1 copy survived. Handwritten annotations, margins filled with revisions, warnings, and a final note on the last page written by the director himself. We are not containing her. We are containing ourselves. After the report disappeared, Facility 12B changed its approach. No more long observations, no more tests. Eliza was kept alive, fed, maintained, but not studied. She spent most of her time sitting, sometimes standing, always facing the glass, waiting for what no one could say. Then in 1893 she moved. Part 7, Sudden Transfers, Sudden Deaths. Eliza's movement was subtle, almost unremarkable. A shift in posture, a step closer to the glass, a presence felt before it was seen. But the staff noticed immediately, because Eliza had not moved voluntarily in over a decade. Within days, Facility 12B experienced its first fatality. A technician collapsed in the control room. No prior symptoms, no warning. He had not been in Eliza's wing, but he had reviewed her file that morning. The second death followed a week later, then another. Always different roles, different departments, different distances. The only constant, awareness. Those who thought about Eliza, studied her records, spent time near her wing. They were the ones affected first. Panic spread quietly. This was a federal site. Panic was not allowed. Instead, they initiated protocol relocation. Eliza would be moved again to see if the pattern followed. The first transfer ended in disaster. The transport team never arrived. Their carriage was found abandoned. Horses alive, no signs of struggle. Eliza was seated inside, alone, waiting. The second attempt involved a train, more personnel, more safeguards. The train derailed outside a small town. Officially, mechanical failure. Unofficially, every engineer involved had reviewed Eliza's case file within 48 hours of the crash. Eliza survived, uninjured. After that, the transfers accelerated. Shorter distances, shorter stays, always temporary, always fatal. Facilities closed, units disbanded, staff reassigned or lost. Eliza became a moving epicenter, a problem that could not remain still and could not be placed anywhere permanently. By 1901, the government made a decision that would never be recorded. Eliza Ward would no longer be moved between facilities. She would be moved through them. Short durations, minimal exposure, no records kept locally, no continuity. She became a ghost in the system, present, then gone, leaving only disruption behind. One nurse survived long enough to notice something new, something worse. Eliza was changing, not physically, but behaviorally. She was no longer waiting. She was anticipating, standing closer to doors before they opened, turning her head toward voices before they spoke, as if she were learning. The nurse wrote one final note before requesting immediate discharge. I don't think she's passive anymore. The request was denied. The nurse was dead 2 days later. By 1910, Eliza Ward no longer appeared in any searchable registry. Her name was scrubbed, her records fragmented, her existence reclassified. But the deaths did not stop. They only became harder to trace. Part 8, the nurse who survived, her name was Margaret Hale, and according to the official record, she never worked anywhere near Eliza Ward. That is the first lie. Margaret Hale entered federal service in 1906, young but already experienced. She had worked cholera wards, tuberculosis units, and field hospitals where screaming was constant and death ordinary. She did not believe in curses. She did not believe in contagion of fear. She believed in exhaustion, stress, and human fragility, which is why she lasted longer than anyone else. Margaret was assigned to a temporary holding site, one that existed for only 11 weeks. The building had no name. It had once been a customs outpost, then a storage depot, then nothing at all. Until Eliza arrived, Margaret's first impression was disappointment. This was the danger, a thin woman sitting quietly behind reinforced glass. No chains, no restraints, no signs of agitation. Eliza looked tired, older perhaps, but not monstrous. Margaret followed protocol. She avoided prolonged observation, did not read the full file, delivered meals, removed trays, logged vitals via instruments, never eye contact. And for weeks nothing happened. No deaths, no headaches, no unease. Margaret began to believe the stories were exaggerated. Then one night the power failed. Not entirely. Just enough to dim the lights. Backup generators engaged seconds later. But in that moment, that brief lapse, Margaret looked directly at Eliza. And Eliza looked back. Margaret later said it wasn't the eye contact that frightened her. It was recognition, not familiarity, recognition, as if Eliza had been waiting for her specifically. From that night on, Margaret began to dream, not nightmares, memories, places she had never been, hallways she somehow knew, institutions she later realized no longer existed. She would wake knowing where Eliza had been before the records said she had arrived. Margaret started keeping her own notes, not dates, not symptoms, but impressions. She doesn't move unless something is about to happen. The building feels anticipatory. This isn't influence, it's alignment. The site closed abruptly after a junior administrator collapsed. Margaret was reassigned. Unlike the others, she did not fall ill. She did not die. She was released. No explanation, no debriefing, just silence. Years later, Margaret would testify unofficially to no one in authority that she believed Eliza was not the cause of the deaths. She believed Eliza was where deaths gathered, a focal point, a gravity well. Margaret lived to 89. She never married, never worked institutional medicine again, and never stopped writing. Part 9, Erasure from National Records. By 1920, Eliza Ward officially did not exist. No birth record, no census entry, no institutional registry. Every mention of her name had been reclassified, redacted, or removed. Even facility 12B disappeared from budget reports. It was as if an entire logistical history had been quietly swallowed. This was not done in one sweep. Erasure is never dramatic. It is incremental. A file miscategorized, a ledger misplaced, a cross-reference deleted. Over time, the absence becomes normal. What survived were fragments, footnotes, margins, misfiled correspondence. A clerk's note that made no sense in isolation. Do not consolidate. Pattern risk. Margaret Hale noticed the erasure first, because her own records were changing. Employment dates altered. Assignments removed. Whole years missing. Not classified, just gone. She began writing letters to archives, to hospitals, to anyone who might still have something. Most never replied. A few did. One archivist sent a single sentence. Some names are removed for reasons not related to secrecy. Margaret understood then. This wasn't about hiding Eliza. It was about preventing convergence. If no one knew the whole story, no one could recreate the conditions. The last confirmed mention of Eliza Ward appears in a 1937 internal memo. One line, no context. Subject influence persists in absence. After that, nothing. Yet the deaths continued, scattered, unconnected, untraceable. A researcher here, a nurse there. Always people who had accessed fragmented records, always dismissed as coincidence. Eliza did not need to be present anymore. The system itself had become the carrier. Part 10, Why the File is Still Sealed. In 1972, Margaret Hale requested her own records. She was 92. She knew she was near the end. She wanted to see what remained. What arrived was a thin envelope. Most pages blank, others altered, but inside was something unexpected. A photocopy, poor quality, part of the comprehensive analysis, the report that was never published. Someone had broken protocol. Someone had let it survive. Margaret read it slowly, then once more, and finally understood what no one had ever written outright. Eliza Ward was not anomalous. She was consistent. She did not change. The world around her did. The report's final suppressed conclusion, crossed out in ink, read, "The subject does not introduce instability. She reveals it." Margaret sealed the pages in a box and wrote one last entry. If she is still alive, she is still watching, not us, the systems that pretend control. Margaret Hale died 3 weeks later, peacefully. At home, the box disappeared. The copy vanished. The file remained sealed. To this day, portions of federal archival indices reference a restricted human containment case with no subject listed, no details, no access, no expiration date. And somewhere, whether in a forgotten facility, a sealed wing, or nowhere physical at all, something waits. Not hostile, not benevolent, just present, because Eliza Ward was never the danger. She was the proof.